Neutrogena.
WWE. 3 little letters, but one extraordinary experience.
Let's go. What a moment! Oh, absolutely incredible!
It's more than a spectacle. We are a community. We are WWE.